All right. For those of you who do have an interview coming up, I think you need to stop a minute, take a deep breath, and congratulate yourself because your resume did what it needed to do. Your resume got your foot in the door. Yep. Applause for everyone has an interview coming up or has had an interview because your resume and cover letter are doing their job. So you need to congratulate yourself. So much of our job search is about trudging ahead and working through adversity and disappointment and frustration. But we need to celebrate when we can celebrate. And if you got an interview, congratulations. Please take a moment to say, wow, that's awesome. So there are things that you need to do before you do the interview, right? You need to research the employer. You need to know the skills that they're looking for, check your attitude, and look good, right? So why research the employer, right? Anybody want to put something in the chat? Why do you think it's important to research the employer before you have the interview? Scams are a good one.
Okay, we're getting some good ones in here. The first one was yes, a scam. The other ones that I see coming into the chat is so you can know the skills that they're looking for, which is excellent. Understanding the company's culture. Somebody had an interview on yesterday. Connect with the company. Something about the environment which is relevant to the culture.
All those are really
Make sure
good
you're a good
answers.
fit too.
Yep. And sometimes you get asked a question, why do you want to work at this company? And if you don't know anything about the company, there's no way that you can answer that question. And saying that you need a job that pays at this level and you want health insurance is not a good reason or a good answer for that question. You, in theory, did research about the employer before you applied because that helped you write your cover letter. That helped you tweak the verbiage in your resume. But you need to go in a little bit deeper before the interview. And if you know who's going to be on the panel, you might even want to research via LinkedIn or the company website the people that are on the panel. You do not want to ask a question that's already answered on the company website. That looks like you're not into details, you're not well organized, and you're just doing this on the fly. And then how do you figure out the skills that they need? You want to put something in the chat? Nobody knows how to figure out the skills they need? Well, you already did that, right? Yep, the job posting. You had to do that before you even got the interview because you had to highlight those skills in your resume. But after you get the job interview appointment, it's good to go back and look at the job posting again and make sure that you have stories that align with how you exhibit those skills in any of your past employers. Checking your attitude is the number one thing that you really need to do because what they're looking for is a team player. They want to know if you fit into the team, if you would be a good person to work with, if they think that you would be an asset, right? They already think that you have the skills needed to perform the job because that's how you got the interview. So you need to come across as a person that somebody would want on their team. You need to come across positive. This might be your sixth interview in 8 months, and you're thinking, why the hell even bother? And if you project that attitude, it will be your seventh interview in 8 months. that you haven't gotten an offer. You need to be upbeat, you need to be positive, and you need to project energy and passion. And looking good goes without being said. You wouldn't show up to an interview without your hair combed, a clean shirt on that doesn't need to be ironed. A good way to figure out the company culture is, again, the website, and then just dress a little bit above the position that you're applying for. So there are many different kinds of interviews. There's a telephone screening in person, which now, excuse me, has been replaced almost through to the final interview, if not the final interview, with a virtual selection, behavioral, work sample, peer group. The telephone screening is usually done by HR, all right? They're there to find out if you really live up to what you're saying on your resume. So they might ask more in-depth questions about your education, the objective you have for your career, and if you really do have the required skills. It's really important to be organized, and you can reschedule this. When I was out looking for a job, I applied for quite a few jobs over a year period of time, and I had applied for a job in July. And at the end of October, I got this call from somebody wanting to schedule a screening, a phone interview. He didn't even really introduce himself. He was calling from the state. And he told me the department, but he didn't tell me the position. And I had to ask those questions. And then I asked to schedule it because it had been quite a while. But even if it hadn't been quite a while, I would want the job posting in front of me during the phone interview. I would want the resume that I submitted and the cover letter that I submitted. I would want all of that in front of me. And I would also want to just check out the company website briefly, if not in depth, so I would be able to come across and be articulate when answering the questions. Because if you don't make it through the phone screening, you're not going to get the in-person. It's just as important to be organized and knowledgeable for a short phone screening, which sometimes doesn't even last more than 5 or 10 minutes, as it is for an in-person or virtual appointment. The next one is the in-person or virtual. Thanks to COVID, more and more companies are just doing all of that online. If you're having a virtual appointment, you want to make sure that all your technology works. You want to make sure that you have the bandwidth to show up both virtually and auditory on the meeting. You want to make sure that you have downloaded or done anything that needed to be done to be able to use whatever program they use. Most people use Teams, most employers. Some also, quite a few use Zoom. There's Google Meetup, and there are others. If you don't have the internet connection that's needed to be able to do that meeting and not worry about being disconnected or scrambling, I know, at least in the Twin Cities, and I'm sure in other places, libraries have what they call study rooms, and you can use the library internet access, and you can reserve for free a study room at a library, and that will give you a good connection. That will also give you an uninterrupted space. So besides wanting to make sure your connections are all good, you can also reserve at some of the career force centers. Correct. Thank you, Pamela. That's really great. I know that here at the North, we have 2 rooms that are called hotel rooms, and you can reserve those for virtual interviews. You also want to make sure that you don't have a lot of background noise. So if you cannot be, oh, good point. Kendall said, check your earbuds and your microphone. That's part of tech. You need to check all of your tech. You also need to make sure that your dog isn't running in and out of the room, that your kids aren't knocking at the door. There are some unwanted, uncontrollable situations. Once I was on a call, an interview, and I live in a townhouse association, and they started re-roofing the roof on top of me. I was on the second floor. So I had to ask for a minute so I could go down a floor with my laptop so the noise wouldn't be so loud. I didn't know that was going to happen, and that wasn't something I could stop. So the bottom line is you want to control everything you can control, and you need to come off as professional as possible because they're checking you out, right? The goal is to select the best candidate, and the decision makers are checking everything out. You don't want anything in the background that would communicate something that you don't think would be professional. The best background is the plain wall behind you. Remember that 80% or more of communication is nonverbal. So, how you sit, what you wear, your hair, the amount or of makeup and jewelry, and the background is all part of clues that the people on the board use to judge you as a suitable employee and member of their team. The next interview is the selection interview, and that could be multiple interviews. I've talked to people who have had 3, 4, sometimes 5 interviews with different people, sometimes individually, and then the same group of people on a panel. It's done for consistency. Do you tell the same story? How do you interact with different personality types? Many jobs now are going to multiple interviews to help them with the selection process. So a selection interview is in person or virtual, but it's just multiple interviews to make sure they're getting the right person. Behavior interviews have more to do with the question, and we'll talk about those later on. It provides information about your job, on the job behavior. They want examples of what you've done and how you've done it. Work samples can be a portfolio. If you're a welder, they might have you come in and do a weld sample. If you're working as applying for a job that's trainer, they might have you come in and teach a sample class to see what your rapport is with the audience, how you present your materials, how you answer questions. Group and peer interviews could be with the whole group on the team. It might be a lunch. It might be going out for a drink after a selection interview. They want to see how you interact with the team. Group interview could be you and a couple other people that are applying for the same job, and see how you deal with that stress. The thing to remember is that if you go to an in-person interview, from the moment you walk onto the campus or walk into the building of the employer, your interview starts. So, how you deal with the parking attendant, how you interact with the receptionist, all those things are taken into consideration, and you need to be aware. My biggest piece of advice is turn off your cell phone. Don't let that be an interruption. Anytime you have an in-person or virtual appointment, an interview, your cell phone should not be anywhere near you so you're not distracted from it. And if you're like me and you have one of those watches that buzz when you get a text, take it off if you can't stop yourself from looking at your watch. You want all your focus to be on the interview and how you present yourself. Oh, and I think my watch just turns itself off. So I did what I'm telling you not to do. So when we talk about the image, we're talking about sending a good signal, right? Part of that is arriving on time. And Lana, when it's a virtual interview, last time we did this, you suggested that they arrive 15 minutes early and log on. I've done some research, and the thing that I get, the message I get is that 5 minutes beforehand is the optimal amount of time. And if you need to check your technology, see if you can do that before the day of the interview. Do you have any comments about that? She's probably busy, so we'll come back to that. But I think that from all the research I've done, 15 minutes, 5 minutes beforehand is the best, because they're probably hopping from interview to interview, and you don't want them to have to interact with you before they're ready to interact with you. Again, you always remember that 80% or more. Oh, hi, Lana. Okay, so we're talking about virtual interviews and
Yeah, I heard you. I'm here. I had to turn off one of my screens. It wouldn't let me get back to this screen. But anyway, because I had too many screens up. But sorry about that. So I still recommend, I'm still going to stay on the 15. 5 minutes, because everybody clock varies. So your 5 minutes can possibly be only 3 minutes if your clock is slightly off. So I still would encourage 15 minutes just for wiggle room. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And it's okay that we have different opinions. You do what works best for you, right? And if you've been showing up 15 minutes early and you're not, and you get the interview and you're not getting the offer, then maybe that's part of your behavior that you need to adjust. And maybe instead of 5 minutes early, do 8 minutes early. So you have that wiggle room for differences in time. One of the things about job searching is that it's your job search, and you need to do what works for you. We can offer guidelines and suggestions and discuss different options, but you need to show up as you, because you don't want to get a job and be uncomfortable in it because you faked your way through it, right? And the beauty of word processing and getting more than one interview is that you can try out different things. And then eventually you'll get it so you're right on the spot, and you'll get that offer. And it's all about tenacity and just keeping on the path and working through things that come up in your as roadblocks. You want to focus on the questions, and you want to answer carefully. And it's okay to pause. If you're asked a question that you don't have the answer for right away, you can even ask if you can come back to it, right? You can ask, I needed some time to think. Can we come back to that? Or you can repeat the question, and that gives you a little bit of time for things to click in. Part of the thing that you can do to prepare is Lana will send you common interview questions. You can Google common interview questions. You can even Google common interview questions for your field. A really a fun thing to do is to use Chat GPT, put in the job postings and say, what questions would be asked during an interview for this position? And it will give you 5 to 10 questions that Chat GPT thinks you'll be asked. And just working through the answers for those questions will help you prepare for those questions and similar questions. And it will get you thinking and put you in the mind frames. So that's really a good trick to do. Avoid being creepy or weird. You don't want to oh, okay. So yeah, so I'm talking about 5 minutes for a virtual interview, but if you do an in-person interview, um, and somebody brought up the fact about security getting into the building, you might want to allow at least a half hour And if you get into the building easier than that, don't show up at the place until 15 minutes before the interview. And if you do get there, do not sit in the waiting room talking on your phone. It's considered bad etiquette. Remember that the conversation is about showing what you can do, and you need to back up your examples with concrete illustrations of what you do. Stories are always best. People remember stories. We're hardwired to remember stories. So if you can do anything into making it a story, that's great. And emphasize your commitment to always wanting to learn. No matter what your age, you want to say that you're open to learning. People tend not to want to hire somebody who thinks they know it all. Because every business is different. Every team within a business is different. You need to express and show with examples that you're open to learning. You want a strong finish. So you want to wrap up by summarizing your qualities. You never leave an interview without asking at least one, if not more, questions. You want to be proactive in your follow-up. And you want to show interest by asking when the position will be filled or what the next steps are. Afterwards, you want to evaluate, and don't be crushing. Pretend that you're helping a friend evaluate how they did in the interview. We often don't talk to ourselves like we talk to our friends and family. So you want to talk to yourself and review what you did as if you were your friend. And then you want to record your follow-up plan, and you always want to send thank yous. So we'll get back to that. Are there any questions before we go on? No. Okay.
Okay, I don't know, it's not necessarily a question, it's more like a statement. One person did mention that it depends on the size of the company, whether or not you arrive early or arrive late. Somebody said that was a good point, getting past security. Somebody just mentioned that they do survey the lobby, as you aforementioned. Somebody is asking the question, what do you think about thank you notes, which that's going to come up a little bit later.
Right.
And then, and whether or not they should be hammering, we will address that as well later.
Okay.
And what questions you should ask, that'll also be addressed later. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So has anybody who's had an interview had a tough question that they were kind of at a loss on how to handle? Yes or no? In the chat. So those of you who are saying yes, could you type in what the question was?
I do see the questions coming in. Then one person put in here that one of the questions that the worst question they was asked is, why do you want to work here? I do know for a fact that Washington County does ask that question. Let's see. Sell me this pencil. I guess that person may be in sales.
Right. I would
What
hope
is your
so.
what is your biggest weakness?
And one of them was about a tree. If you were to be a tree, what tree would you be?
Yeah.
So
And somebody said something about they was asked to do some role playing and that it was hard to do a fake versus a real life scenario.
how
And
do you
then the
handle an
final one
angry
that I see
customer?
on here is, how do you handle angry customers?
And they probably in a customer service role. And I would, cool. Where were
Oh,
you?
wait.
When were you where Kennedy died? Is that?
Yeah, that is a question.
That's an age question. I would not even, that's, oh, that's interesting.
Somebody said they was asked about salary. So you got some
Right.
good questions coming in here. How do
Cool.
you encourage high performance and support underperformers? I love that question as well. Good.
Yeah, because that's probably for a management position. And why are you no longer at your last employer? So that why you are no longer at your last employer, we're not going to handle directly here. Um, I'll teach you we'll talk about techniques that might be useful, but that's a very personal way you answer that depending on the situation. And for that question in particular, I suggest you connect with your local career force. Questions about if you could be a tree, what tree would you be? If you how, if you could, what day of the week is your favorite day of the week? If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live and why? Those are all questions just to think about, to ask you about, to learn about your thought process and your values. Because when you answer, if you could be any kind of tree, what tree would you be? You're picking a tree and you have to say why. So then you're communicating what's important. Like I would be a ginkgo tree. And one of the reasons I would be a ginkgo tree is that it's one of the oldest trees um, in in the world. It's pretty much a fossil tree. And I'm intrigued by all the knowledge that it will have had absorbed over the millennial. And I would like to be a continuous learner and continuously absorb knowledge. And I also think that the leaf is really a great design, and I love the texture. And so I've told you a lot about myself by answering that question. So when you answer questions like that, you have to decide what you want to share of your values and your experience and what you don't want to share. Yeah. And why you want to work at a company, we addressed that earlier. That's why you do your research. That's why, if possible, you know the mission and the goals of the organization. I have a colleague who was asked that question and talked about something within the mission statement. And one of the people on the panel said, "Oh, I didn't know that that was in our mission. Can you tell me more why that excites you?" So then that conversation started. A lot of interviews, except for the state and a lot of government jobs, are conversations. You ask a question, you answer, sometimes they do follow-up. When you apply for a state of Minnesota job, it's usually a panel of 3 or 4 people. They have a set group of questions between 7 and 12, and they rotate asking you those questions, and they do not ask follow-up questions. So it seems kind of like the Miss America pageant, where you're given a question and you answer it and nobody says anything. So it's a little bit harder to get a conversation going, but every time you answer a question, you're telling them a little bit more about yourself. The sandwich method is where you have a positive and a negative and a positive, because people remember the first thing you say and the last thing you say more than they do the middle. So an example would be, tell me about one of your weaknesses. Although I really like people, I get nervous when I speak in front of large groups. So I'm working on this by taking public speaking classes at the local college. I think this will benefit your organization with the quarterly presentations that you mentioned. So the positive was, I really like people. The negative was, I'm nervous when I talk in front of a large group. The positive is, I'm working on this by taking this class. And then the bonus, so maybe it's the condiment or the garnish, is that this will benefit your organization with the quarterly presentations that you mentioned. So I like this method because it's a visual. You know what a sandwich is. It has a top and a bottom that are bread, and it has a middle. And so it's easy to remember and it's useful for a lot of different reasons. And also it gives you time, right? So if you asked about one of your weaknesses, you can say, oh, I really like people. As you're thinking about that, you can other things can click in space. And when you do an interview, you don't have to talk really fast. Talking slow and a normal conversational pace is really the best. Any questions about the sandwich method? Other questions that this would work well is tell me about your worst boss. The most important thing to remember when talking about your worst boss is never to say how bad they really were. You're not talking about negative. If there, you can say, there was a difference in opinion and this is how we resolved it. This might also be good for what planet would you be? In a brick wall, what brick would you be? Tell me about a time you failed. So the failure is the negative part. So you don't ever want to use failed in your answer, but you want to stick the event that didn't go right. That's in the middle. You know, um, I really, one of the favorite parts of my job is planning and executing job fairs. I really, really love doing that. One of the challenges is getting people to come. In my experience, I have found that a lot of times a job fair in and of itself is not a draw to get a lot of people in. So what I've learned is to have it associated with other events. And that has increased turnout at our job fairs by over 50%. Right. So the positive was I really like doing this. The negative is I had some that didn't have many people at, but I learned how to get more people there and I increased involvement. So any questions about the sandwich method? All right. My all-time favorite is the star method. Oh, sorry. Situation, task, action, and results. It's a really great way to organize your thoughts. And you want to spend the most time on action and results. Just like your resume has accomplishment statements on it, people don't want to just know that you can do something. They want to know how you do it and what are the results. So the situation provides an example of a situation that you used a particular skill at, and the tasks is what you did with that skill, right? The action is that you took in that situation, and the results is what happened, right? Um, so an example would be, tell me a time when you had to work in a team. So the situation is a lot of the job fairs that we have in North and South Minneapolis are planned with the city of Minneapolis because they're the Economic Development Board that governs our career force. And so I work on quite a few projects with a committee of 4 or 5 people. And our tasks is to organize and have job events, job fairs and hiring events for the community that we serve. The action was planning those events, but sometimes planning by committee is hard. And one of the things we did was establish regular weekly meetings, check-in, where we talked about the goal, reviewed the event in itself, talked about the actions that people were responsible and gave updates on those, and then left the meeting with with more action steps. And the result was successful events. We had an event for driver's license for all that pulled in well over 300 people. Um, so by working with committee, you share the workload, but the issue is organizing and making sure nothing falls through the cracks. So we did weekly check-in meetings. So the situation, the task, the action, the results. Any questions about STAR? STAR are used a lot because they're behavioral questions. They're questions that get into your behavior. And that's what people are trying to find out. Remember, we said earlier that you should spend the most time on the action and the result, and the very most time on the result. Because remember, people hear the first thing and the last thing. And so the result should be positive, and the situation shouldn't be, I had to deal with a really awful coworker. Instead it would be, I was put on a team and there was a difference of opinion with one of my coworkers. So you want to remember that it's the first and the last thing that people remember, and you want to spend the most time on the results. But you also want to spend time on the action because people want to know what you did. And this works well for all of these questions, just like some of these questions work good with the sandwich method, right? Tell me about yourself. That question is not asking you to say, I'm the oldest of 12 kids. I went to college and paid for it myself. I've been dragging myself by my bootstraps up the organization's ladder ever since. And I really need this job because I need health insurance. That's not what they're asking you. They're asking you to tell them about yourself as it relates to the points in the job posting. So this is another opportunity to say something about your skills. If you're applying for a training job, it would be, I have 10 plus years of experience translating information from subject matter experts into a digestible form for a variety of audiences, producing great training results. Were there questions, Lana? I saw things pop up. Okay.
Okay. One of them you actually already answered, I guess, because someone asked, why should we spend which one should we spend the most time on? So we already did that. And the other person is just making a statement. And then the next one is there a guideline to a good and quick pitch?
So again, if you Google tell me answers to tell me about yourself questions, you would get a lot of different techniques. In some ways, it's your elevator pitch, not maybe 4 floors, but maybe 2 floors. The bottom line is this is another opportunity to sell yourself and your skills. And so you need to bring in verbiage from the posting to say that you can do the job. We already talked about your major weaknesses, your major strengths. It's not a total opportunity to brag. It's an opportunity to, again, highlight a skill, a value, a passion that relates to the job posting. And then I might give you a problem and ask you how you solve it. Where do you see yourself in 3 years? Is not the manager of the company, but if you know about the company, you can talk about how you're using this to learn and that you see yourself, gathering learning more and being more adept at what you're doing and seeing how else in the business you can apply your skills. It takes a lot of time and money for somebody to go through the hiring process for the business. And as angst it is about, for us, the job seeker to do the resume, to do the cover letter, to prepare for the interview, it's all stress producing. It's also stress producing for the employers because they might have had a bad hire. You might be one of 3 positions that they're hiring for. And it takes time to review resumes. It takes time to interview people. It takes time to find what they feel will be the best fit. So it's stressful on both ends, and you need to keep that into consideration. So saying that you're going to retire in 3 years might not be the best thing to say. So you want to always, any question you get is an opportunity to talk about how you are the best fit for the job. So I saw some questions come up. Do we want to wait till I'm
Some of the questions you actually, you must be reading because you've answered it. As far as it relates to the one about what if you're near retirement,
okay?
somebody's asking, what is the best question to ask at the end of the interview? And then somebody else prior to that was saying, in other words, how do you concisely answer, tell me about yourself? And you gave out information for that
Okay.
as well. And someone said, should you talk more about your weakness? If no, how do you evade that question? I think you answered that question already.
Yeah, you don't evade it, but the sandwich method is a good way to do that. Um, so I would say that if I was talking about one of my weaknesses, I would say I really like working on projects. I'm one of my strength finders is strategic, is strategic, and I really like being part of projects, and I like being given assignments to work on by myself. One of the issues is that I always thought that I procrastinated. Um, but that ends up not necessarily being true. I taught a soft skills class at Stillwater Prison for 3 years. And one of the things we did was an assessment called True Colors. So your gold, blue, orange, or green. And I took it multiple times and I was a solid green. And green people are really, really, really into information. You can't, I would work on a project and there was one more thing I can read, one more person I would talk to, one more experiment to run. And then all of a sudden, there was the deadline. And what I've realized is that I need to have two deadlines for big projects that I'm working on. I have a deadline for when I'm done researching, I'm done talking to people, I'm done accumulating information. I have to work on the project. And then there's the actual project due date. And by doing this, by making this small shift, I've been able to bring 90% of the projects I work on done before the deadline because I realized that I could research forever. If I did not have to work, I won't say this in an interview, but if I did not have to work, I would be a full-time student. So, but I would say in the interview, I really love information. I love learning. So, um, but you never want, because nobody is without weaknesses and nobody likes people who are totally puffed up and think they're all about strengths. So you always want to always think of a way to relate any answer to the job or the company. Good?
There are some questions that's coming in here as well as you were talking. One question is, what is the best question to ask at the end of an interview? The one, uh, and then you talked about the weakness. It says, what should you talk more about your weakness? Okay. Someone is asking how much material documents should you have with you when showing prior work experience? That's going to depend on the job. And you did just tell them about how to do the weakness and strength. You answered that already. Is it okay to take notes during the interview? Absolutely.
Yep. And if it's uncomfortable for you, always ask at the beginning. Is it okay if I take notes? Yeah. So what you're talking about, taking work samples with you, that's a portfolio and that varies. But no matter what type of job that you're applying for, I would always take at least 5 copies of your resume and cover letter because you don't know if everybody on the panel has seen your resume or cover letter. And that might just be a really nice thing if that comes up in conversation. You might never use them. It's also good to have at least 1 copy of your references in case you're asked at an in-person interview. Never ever have anybody on that list that you've not talked to previously. If you can't, a lot of times we can't show specific work examples because they're proprietary information that are not public information. If you did a really awesome spreadsheet for a former employer, you can show the bones of the spreadsheet maybe, but not the information that's in it. Or the results, the graphs and things like that that you can produce from it without real information in it. If you're a writer, you might want to have some writing samples. If I was going for a training job, I might have a PowerPoint printed out so they can see what I can produce for training materials and handouts. Cover letters are covered in the resume workshop a little bit, and we're in the process of designing another workshop specifically for cover letters, but it's okay to have a template. It's a good idea to have a basic cover letter and resume, but it always needs to be tweaked for the job that you're applying for. Questions that you ask at the end of the interview, the very last question would be, what are the next steps? When will you have this job filled? Before that, you might ask, tell me about a day, what an average day is in this position. How would you judge success in this position? Lana will send you some questions in the handout about what they are. You could also ask ChatGPT, put in the job description, what are some good questions to ask at the end of an interview for this position? It's a fun technology to play with. And the standard question we've already addressed previously is, why did you leave your last job? That varies from person to person. Never say fired. Never say quit. But it's something that you need to address individually with somebody at your career force. We will send you a list of local career forces in the state. You can also find them on on careerforcemn.com. They have a list there. They have the phone numbers and the addresses. So that question is so big that it's really not good. We don't have the time here, and you don't have the privacy to necessarily answer that question. Post-interview steps. So if they asked you for your references or you think it really went well, contact your references and let them know. I always send my references an email that includes the job posting, the resume, the cover letter, and then highlights from the interview so they're aware if they get called. Send a thank you note. All right. So there's a lot of conversation that one can have around thank you notes. You can send an email that's immediate. You can send a card. And what's nice about a card is that if it has a pretty picture, there's a 75% chance that they'll put it up on their wall or their bulletin board, and that will be a reminder of you. You could do both. You could do an email immediately and follow it up with a card. And in the thank you, highlight points that were brought up in the interview. I would be delighted to be part of this team. I think that my skill set would help solve the X and Y problems that we discussed. But you always, again, want to circle around to the job and how you would help by being in that position how you fill out what the posting was asking for. All right. Are there more questions?
Well, let's see. They're talking about scams.
Yeah. There's a lot of them out recently, which is sad.
Now, there's a question. How do you handle an inappropriate question?
So if somebody asks about your age, you can ask that you have experience. You, yeah, oh God. It's just like you want to roll your eyes and say, "Do you know that's illegal?" But that's not a positive way to do that. Um, you could say that you feel that you have the experience to do the job and the passion and the energy to fulfill the obligations of the position. But you don't need to answer it directly. Do you have any thoughts on that, Lana?
I think I think I don't know if I would answer an illegal question. For example, they may ask you, how many kids do you have? That's not really a legal question. And you can answer something. Okay, thank you. I see that. You can answer the question by saying something similar to, the number of kids that I have has no does not have any bearings on my skill sets or my ability to do this job. Is there another question, please?
Right. And sometimes it's okay to pause because those things kind of catch you off balance.
Someone put in here that
With age
somebody
comes
said,
wisdom.
yeah, yeah, because the person before that says, "What did you do to this?" Is how you answer the age question. So, how do you answer the age question? That's not a legal question either. And I used to not tell people my age, and then I had a certain birthday, and it was no longer a secret because they put it on Facebook because I had a party. So I may tell my age now, whereby I wouldn't do this like 20 years ago. Um, but realistically, I know if they can do the math, they can Google you, they can search you. So that illegal question doesn't bother me as much. But again, I would answer very similar to, my age has nothing to do with my skill sets and my ability to perform this job as director of the HR department. And is there any other questions, please? So I would not answer them. Yeah.
You could, so if you, depending on how the interview is going, you could ask, um, when did you start working for this company? And did you feel that your age was a hindrance or a plus? But that's kind of snide.
And then I like that Mark said, oops, I didn't mean to say your name. But anyway, I do like that it does say in the chat that they would nix that person for further consideration, that company for consideration. Because the one thing you want to remember when you're doing the interview, it's not just them asking you questions.
Right.
You're also there to determine if this is an organization that you want to put your skill sets in, that you want to deliver or help them to reach their bottom line. So you are also making a decision. It's not just the interviewer. You're also checking out the environment,
Right.
are you picking up bad vibes and things of that nature. So I do love the fact that somebody did mention that in the
Yeah.
chat, that you would that person would no longer consider that organization. Excellent, thank you.
Right. Because, right. Right. Yeah. Because you are also, and that's a great point, and we should bring that up all the time, that you're also interviewing the company, and you're seeing if you want to work in that culture. Because if you are of a certain age and had a certain amount of jobs, you know what a toxic culture can do or toxic people. I once didn't get a second interview because I asked as a, question at the end, could you tell me about your leadership style? Because I had just come from working with a micromanager and I did not want to repeat that. And the woman paused and looked at the other person on the panel and said, how would you describe my leadership style? So, A, she didn't know how to answer it, and she put another employee on the spot. And so I was kind of glad that I didn't get a second interview because, yep, that's a definite red flag. Definite red flag. Um, so, um, lots of great things in the comments. Make sure that you read through them. Um, So thank you very much for joining us. If they're appreciate, so someone asked, are there groups to network? If you go to careerforcemn.com and you go to the virtual and interactive services tab, there's a calendar of now mostly in-person events, networking events, or hybrid. I know that there's a really great job club in Thief River Falls, run by facilitated by a coworker. We have one in Minneapolis, that's hybrid, so you can be anywhere in the state, and that's Thursday mornings from 9 to 11, and we have different topics that we talk about and have different speakers. So that's a great group to come to. We are talking about career planning this Thursday with a guest speaker, another colleague of ours is presenting. So please check it out. Any other questions? Cool. All right. Thank you very much for spending the hour with us. Remember, there are 5 other workshops that are awesome that you could sign up for. Remember to check out your local career force. The resources are awesome, from vets to vocational rehab to just basic help or someone to talk through stuff with. Just even if you feel comfortable with your resume, it might be good to have another set of eyes on it. So please, we are here to help you and we don't cost you anything. So check us out. And if there aren't any other questions, I can give you back a minute of your day.